Okay, thank you, Sean. Welcome everybody to the Town of Colonie Planning Board meeting. We have 3 items on the agenda. Sean, I would like to ask you one technical thing, which occurred to me when you were just talking before the meeting. I was getting texts from some people that wanted to be unmuted. Can they send? And you said that was something that could be rectified. I mean, I don't mind doing it, but did you have a solution for that? Board members asking to be unmuted.
Right. So everybody has control of their mute tonight.
Okay.
And what we'll do is that we'll keep it that way. But, if people are, speaking out of order, if you'd like me to take control of that again, we'll remove that function.
Yeah. Okay. Well, our board members can never speak out of order by definition. So
yes.
Anyway,
but they all are unmuted.
Okay.
If they've muted themselves. And just remember, in the bottom left corner is the microphone icon to allow you to unmute yourself.
And I would unmute Kathleen too, and whoever the TD is, if you think that's, unless it causes some technical problem.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think everybody is either unmuted. That needs to be unmuted. We're all set. If any board members, I'll unmute you right now, but if you want to mute yourself again, you'll have control of that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
We're
you.
all set.
Okay. As I started to say, we have 3 items on the board agenda, and we had some discussion offline about one particular thing, and that's public comment. It has, in my experience, been the practice of the board, with some exception, to take public comment only when we are voting on an item. So unless the board, agrees, they can speak up. So that being our tradition, our practice, which is over and above what we're required to do by law, we will be taking comment on the first one if there are members of the public that would like to speak, and also on the third item. The second item is a sketch plan. There's no vote, and therefore we will not be taking comment on that. Okay, that said, we will call up the first item on the agenda, which is recommendation for a new home elevation in the Meadowdale Estates Subdivision. And Sean, do you or one of your staff people have any introductory comments before we turn it over to the applicant?
Yes, I'm bringing up on your screen subdivision. There were 12.
I'm having trouble with your audio. Everybody else.
I am as well.
Right, let's see if I can fix that. All right.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I'm gonna keep talking, but I'm gonna switch to the phone in a minute, just for a better connection. So when the planning board first saw this, there were 12 different elevations that were approved. The builders come back with an additional elevation for the board to also consider. That is this elevation right here. All right, I just switched the phone. You can hear me now, okay, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, that should be better. So we've had an additional elevation added to here. So our recommendation after reviewing the prior elevations that were approved, but there's not a substantial difference here. This fits into the character of the development. And so we would recommend that this additional elevation be approved for the Meadowdale Estates Subdivision.
Okay, so for clarification, it's additional. It's not in lieu of, right?
It's an addition. This will be added to the additional approved elevation.
Okay. Craig, I know Craig had some questions on this. Craig, do you want to make some comment?
Yeah, yes, please. First, I think that we need to make sure that in the future, when we get elevation elevations and elevation request changes from developers, we need to see colored renderings. I mean, this isn't even a straight on shot. It's on an oblique angle.
Okay.
So that's just kind of a housekeeping item. Specifically to Meadowdale, and I was not on the board when Meadowdale was approved, but I know that there was a line of evergreens that was planted as a buffer to the North Colonie maintenance facility. And after those were planted, shortly after this was approved, I came on the board. That entire line of evergreens died and was supposed to have been replaced. And to my knowledge, it has never been replaced. So when is it going to be replaced? This is now going on a couple of years. I guess as a starting point of conversation, my vote for approving this new elevation is contingent on a absolute time frame when they are going to get those evergreens and any other landscaping that hasn't been taken care of on that project completed.
Okay. I don't have answers to that, but if you want, I mean, where we are in terms of construction, residential construction is not essential. So this isn't going to be something that happens right away. If you want to table this, we can, take the questions the board has and address those and bring it back, in the next meeting or two.
Well, I think he was just saying he wants the landscaping straightened out before this is as a contingency for this being approved.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I see no reason to bring it back. Other than it'd be nice to get a report back, perhaps, but we don't need to bring the project back, at least not as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
The applicant's not going to speak. I take it? Is that right, Sean?
I don't believe Zach, did we have anybody from Bonaccio?
I don't believe so. I don't believe anyone's here from there.
Okay, we'll open the floor up to the rest of the board members if they want to speak. Anybody? Okay, well, entertain. Chief, did you say something?
No, but I know exactly what Craig is talking about, so there's no question about it. They've been lacking in replacing stuff that died over there.
Okay, I've seen it too. I've seen it as well. So does somebody want to make a motion to approve this elevation contingent upon ensuring that the landscaping is completed?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, Chief second. Any discussion? I'll just ask this. Are there any members of the public there, Sean, that looking to speak?
I'm switching over right now to take a look here.
You're saying no?
I hear somebody saying my name.
I think that was Kathleen.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Did we, I know the plantings are contingent upon the executive order, being done, but do we want to put a time frame on this? If we leave it open, this item may not come back before us, and we may be in the position we're in now where we have years going by and the plantings not having been done.
Hey, Kathleen, I mean, it's been just looking around in my neighborhood and moving around the town a little bit. I mean, landscapers, I think, are exempt because they're all out working.
Actually, you're right. My landscaper is out working.
It
You're right.
doesn't mean they're supposed to be.
Right.
Well, okay, fair enough.
Cosmetic landscaping is not essential. Maintenance would be, but not plantings probably.
Okay.
I don't have a strong opinion on the deadline. Does any other board members want to? Craig, it's your motion. Do you want to?
No. I mean, obviously special times. I just don't want to be looking at, this time next year, the plantings not being. So, if you want to pick a time frame, and I'm happy to leave it up to Sean and staff that some period of time after the executive orders is lifted, they have whatever, 60 days, 90 days to get the landscaping taken care of.
Okay.
Sean, I want to verify that that's part of this subdivision. I remember when they did two separate projects for this. They did the apartments for the actual project, and then they did the residential aspect too. So we just got to make sure what project that those evergreens were a part of.
Okay. So
Okay.
Craig and Pete will verify what that you're concerned about, the line of evergreens by the bus garage, what project that's associated with, and if it's tied into the Meadowdale Estates, well, that'll be contingent. Well, we just say that the motion is to approve the additional elevation contingent on fulfilling the landscaping plan previously approved.
And can you look to, yeah, that sounds good. And can you look to enforcement anyway on that?
Of course.
I think you have mechanisms by which to enforce that through the town attorney's office and so forth.
Okay. So I guess to Craig and Steve, that would be my suggestion to amend that motion.
Sounds good to me.
It's fine.
Okay, so amended. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. For the record, I do not hear any no's, so I'll assume that everybody's affirmative, unless somebody speaks up. Okay, thank you. I have an iPad, a phone, and a laptop here, so give me a second. Got to get back up, get the iPad going. Okay, second item on the agenda. 34 Denison Road, Ridgewood Subdivision. The proposal is to subdivide 103-acre site, 40 acres as open space, develop 63 acres with 80 residential units, 11 lots for stormwater management and open space. Sean, do you have any introductory comments? I know you've worked hard and revised the plan. The plan is substantially different from what we saw last time. And do you have anything else to add before we turn it over to the applicant?
No, I guess what I'll walk through here is, where we are today with this project. Back in November of 2000, this was called the Oakwood Subdivision. It was originally 112 proposed lots with one entrance from Denison Road. And by 2009, that project had evolved and changed into what's now the Ridgewood Subdivision. The concept was approved by the planning board in December of 2009 for cluster development under the current zoning. That included 96 proposed lots and an entrance from Denison Road, as well as one entrance from Newport Drive. You'll see now at this stage, this project continues to evolve and change here. Where we are in this current sketch plan, the numbers have been reduced to 80 lots. Excuse me while I just move some things around the screen here. 80 lot subdivision, conserving 36.69 acres are required, proposing to conserve 38.11 acres. What I've got displayed up here, and I can pull up other maps if you're looking for something specific, but this is the subdivision layout, identifying the conservation areas in green, the steep slopes in purple, and the constrained lands in terms of wetlands, wetlands in sort of that gray hatched area. So some of the elements that are important to consider here is that, and I'll use my pen to highlight these areas, proposed parkland that's been included in this subdivision, some stormwater retention areas in this lot between 9 and 10, as well as over in here. These other areas on the backside in the green are the conservation areas. Again, the purple here is the steep slopes. We also have an archaeological sensitive area on the eastern, I have to get my bearing straight here, the eastern border of the site along Denison Road. So we've reviewed this. I've, posed a couple of initial questions about developing, some of this area where the slopes are quite steep. There's, I guess I'll sort of, frame it at that, and I'll ask Joe Grasso to also step in here and provide his initial thoughts and feedback on his review of this sketch.
Okay, Sean, if you're okay, we normally turn it over to the applicant to show what he's done for us and make their presentation,
Okay.
and then we'll have Joe talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure who's representing the applicant here.
Hi, this is Melissa Courier from CT Mail.
Yeah.
Hi, Melissa.
And Dominic's here as well with CT Mail. I just don't have a video on.
Hi, Dominic.
I'm going to start real quick and let you know what we've done, and then I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to give you a little more update on it. What we did was we went back with Monique about, and Joe went through the history a little bit more for the board, and the presentation that you see in front of you is that information in map form with a little explanation, but it does need a little bit more verbalizing in order to give you a better handle on what's going on, a little bit more than what Sean just gave you. We also took some comments and concerns the board had when we went in front of them the first time about park lands, lot areas, alignment, getting rid of a few things, and then adding additional information. So the last few sections of maps show that information. The first part is more of a history review of what was done, what the land is comprised of, and what we intend to do at this point. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa. She can give you a start from map 1 through the end. And I would suggest at any point when we have those maps up, stop her, ask a question, and then we can continue on from there.
Thank you.
Okay, what Dominic had said was we did have a meeting a few weeks ago with Joe and Monique, and really it was just to try to get in the same page with what was discussed at the last meeting and to give a little bit of a history review of the project. The project's been around a long time, different owners, different iterations, and we thought we would present how it has evolved over time. And in the beginning, we had on this, what we had sent for PDFs, Sean, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the first one, the Oakwood Subdivision. This was back in 2000. This was the initial cluster development. It was prior to the new zoning laws, but it was the first cluster development proposed on this parcel. And this had 112 lots. And I just wanted to show you as a reference just for the evolution of the project, so you're aware of it. It did only have the one entrance, as Sean had mentioned, but it did have that cluster design, and everything was sort of within that ridge, the high ridge of the property, and kept sort of tight and small in regards to those lot sizes. This never did receive a concept of approval, and we did move on to the 2009. This is really just as a history. Moving on to the second one, this is the one that did receive the concept approval that Sean did mention back in 2009. This one had the two entrances, similar and design in regards to the layout to what you see today. Not exactly the same, but the similar design. And it showed the areas a little bit different. There was lands that we showed around the proposed water tower that no longer is owned by the client. It was dedicated to the Latham Water Department, the town, for that tank. So there's some lands shown on here that don't exist anymore as property. Again, this is just to give you some history. This layout was the one that was approved and the one that was used when they decided to lay out the water line that's now on the parcel. It runs up from Forest Hills across Denison Road and then up to the water tower. So that road that you see sort of on the southern, in the middle, underneath that water tower is sort of, it has to stay in that same location because of that water line. And that, we're going to move to the next one, the PDF. This gives you an idea of that high water. Number 3 gives you the idea of the high water tank, Fly Road, Denison service area. I think this is number 6, Sean. Could you go to number 3 if you have it?
I don't have number 3.
Oh, that's
Sean,
okay.
check the Dropbox. It should be in the Dropbox.
This one is really just a reference for that high water service area, and it gives you an idea of the service for the new water tank, but it shows where that water line goes up and through the subdivision.
Yeah, it's in the project file, Sean.
Thank you.
Oh, yep. Thank you, Sean. So in blue is the area of service of the new water tank that was approved. If you look, you can see sort of in the middle of the property, like a darker line of the new proposal where that water line does exist. There's an easement at the moment, but it does run through the property and through that proposed road from that 2009 approved concept plan. So the intent is to keep that road in that location due to this water line. If we want to move on to the sketch plan, the next sketch plan,
Melissa,
the sketch plan
Melissa,
that you guys previously saw, I don't know if we need to see it again, so we can, if you want, just go to the number 8, Sean. This is a good one. Oh, I'm sorry, number 6, yes. Number 6 is the conservation analysis. And this one shows in green, and Sean already touched on this briefly. This is the new layout. What we had done is we had moved from the southern end near the existing water tower, is where we had the park area sort of set aside. We have now removed that. It's now going to be along Denison Road. Yeah, that's correct. And then there's parcels along that area where the park was originally. Some of the lots have been resized and realigned. But really what this one is good to see, this was the analysis, and this is what we reviewed with Joe Grasso and Monique previously for the areas of preservation, the areas of constraint, whether they were steep slopes or Army Corps wetlands.
Do you want to walk us through and explain the conservation analysis, or do you want Joe Grasso to do that? Because I know Joe.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Either way, yeah, you or Joe Grasso.
Yeah, I have no problem with going through it. If Joe wants to give his opinion, that's fine too. Per the code, and I'm sure you've seen.
Board needs to be. We're in a conservation overlay, correct?
That's correct.
So, which means we have to go through a conservation analysis. Part of it's mathematical, and part of it's what's worth conserving. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so if you could walk through the math part first, so to make
Sure.
sure all the board members understand.
Sure. What we do first is we go through, and there was a wetland survey that was done, an analysis on the site of where there was wetlands, and then there was topography that was either flown or field verified, and we came up with a surface to identify areas of slopes that are greater than 25%. So in purple, we have shown the slopes separate from the Army Corps wetlands. There's no DEC wetlands on the site. It's just Army Corps wetlands, and we have them colored differently. We did those areas. We came up with those areas. And from there.
Yeah, let's go through the math. Can you go through the math?
Absolutely. I'm just opening it on my a little bit closer so I can zoom in.
Yeah.
From there, what we do is we come up with an area of constrained lands. On this site specifically, the total parcel area is 102.79 acres. From there, the total area of constrained lands, and that's a combination of steep slopes and wetlands, is 11.05 acres, leaving 91.74 acres of unconstrained lands. From there, you have to multiply out 40% of that lands to figure out what is required to be preserved after that's not currently constrained. That 40% equals 36.69 acres. So we have to preserve at least 36 acres, over 36 acres of lands that wasn't previously constrained, whether it's steep slopes or. So on this current layout, we have shown in green areas that are not constrained, that we are proposing to preserve. In those areas, it totals out to be 38.11 acres. So it's a couple acres more than what's required to be preserved.
Okay, can you keep going down the chart there? Yeah.
Yeah,
The density is important. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's an error on this map. It says, I don't know why it says 77, it should say 80. That's a typo. But it's 80 lots. But the numbers are all right because I double checked all the math this morning.
Okay, now the density.
Okay, I'm sorry. The density is based on the total of lands that are not constrained times 2 units per acre. It works out to be 183 units are allowed to be developed on this site. It does not, because it's a conservation overlay district, it does not have to meet a minimum requirement in regards to the zoning of the lot width and the lot square footage, so it can be a cluster development. And we can, based on this, propose up to 91 lots. We're proposing 80.
Okay, I don't,
Did that make sense?
yes, you're proposing 80, that says 77, yes, yeah, it does
Yes.
to me. Does the board have any questions on that?
And I don't know if Joe wants to
I think you did a pretty good job, but if Joe wants to say something.
okay.
Yeah, a couple of things. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
So Sean, if you could just stay right on the view, if you could just go back
I'll
to
get
that.
back to it.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Melissa, are you done with your comments or did you have more to cover?
I was just going to show the area overlay, but I'm okay with if you have some comments to talk about those.
Yeah, let's just stick about the math right now.
Yep.
So in terms of the conservation density calculations, we appreciate the way they go through it. It's very methodical and very clear as to how they came up with the acreages. And we will verify, the one thing that would be a variable would be the steep sloped areas. And that's something that we'll verify once they submit a formal concept application. But in terms of the lands required to be preserved, our interpretation of the way it's written in the zoning regulations, it says the plan shall show the constrained land identified by the analysis described above, and at least 40% of the land not constrained as lands to be preserved. So we looked at requirement as being cumulative, where you have to provide both 40% of the unconstrained lands, which is the 11.0, or 40% of the unconstrained lands, which is 36.69 acres, in addition to the area of constrained land, which is 11.05. So if you add those together, you come up with 47.74 acres. That's our interpretation of the code and constitutes the area that would need to be permanently preserved. So that's something that we should, look at, seeing if it could get modified on the plan. The other thing about the calculation is you go through the density there in the center, and you come up with the 183 units. And then down below that, you go through 183 units divided by 2 is 91 units is the base residential density. We're unclear as to what that line reflects, because our interpretation of the code is that the maximum allowable density is the unconstrained land, which is 91.74 acres times 2 units per acre. So 183 units. So if you could just clarify why you've got that extra line that cuts the density down to 91, just something that we can clean up on the plan so that there's no confusion. And then further down on this chart, it says the proposal is for 77 single family lots, but I think the plan proposes 80 lots, and I think you had already clarified that before. So. All right, Melissa, why don't we turn it back over to you before I go through the rest of my comments?
Okay, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And I would like to talk to you further when we get into the next steps in regards to the review of that analysis. I do appreciate your input on that, though. Can we, if it's okay, Sean, go to PDF number 8? And I would like to just as a quick reference for the board, I know that they appreciated last time at least I believe the aerial overview to give you an idea of the preservation lands and the type of lands that they'll be. And I know that they do contain the areas of steep slope, but they are nicely wooded and good buffers for the adjoining properties for the residential areas that surround this project. And I think this is a nice way to see that in regards to the differences from the steep slopes, where the development may be, and the boundary itself. And I thought it gave a good reflection in the colors of that. So I just
Thank you. Thank you. It does look,
wanted to see that.
it's very illustrative. Thank you.
Okay. In regards to anything else, the proposal was still the same. There's still the connection on Denison Road, and the second connection over to the south where the water tanks are is still remaining the same. There is going to be proposals for connecting the water through the north, the south, and on the east side of the properties for sewer and water. We can get into those details during the concept design. Is there any questions from the board?
Well, I think we're going to turn it over to Joe Grasso. I know he hasn't done a formal or generated at least a comment letter, but he's been looking at this a lot. So we would like to hear Joe's comments first, and then we'll turn it over to the board.
Yeah, I'll go through my comments, and I am getting a little bit of feedback, and I assume some others may be as well. If everybody could just mute their mics that don't, and I'm talking anytime soon. So yeah, Pete, we have gone through the plan. We have met with the applicants team. They've done a really commendable job, being responsive to the comments, from our office as well as the planning board at the last sketch plan review meeting. And they've done a great job with the clarity of the information that's presented. Some of the notes that I made in terms of a comparison of the plan that I think of noteworthy was they've eliminated the road frontage lots on Denison Road, which is a strong concern of CHA as well as the planning board. They also, do a really comprehensive job of the constrained lands, including the archaeologically sensitive areas, the federal wetlands, and the steep slopes. Like Melissa mentioned, one of the comments from the board at the last meeting was regarding the size and location of the possible town park, and they relocated at the Denison Road, which I think is a much more desirable location and offers the opportunity that it could serve a public need greater than just a development. And that's something that we'll get into more later. And obviously the size of that parkland is now over 5 acres. That was a concern raised before. So then in terms of some of the comments that we've got on the plan, I mentioned the mathematical things regarding the maximum allowable density and the amount of constrained lands to be preserved. One of the things as part of that conservation analysis is a description of the various areas and why they should not be built on. And that's something that we would look to see as part of the concept subdivision application, because the planning board will use that information to start to formulate its findings regarding the areas to be protected. I already commented about the amount of lands to be preserved, and although the current plan doesn't meet that based on our calculation, it does look like there's some relatively easy modifications to the plan that would allow a greater protection of area in order to satisfy that 47 acre requirement. Overall, the plan does a really good job, avoiding many of the areas of constrained lands. But you can see by a close review of this plan that there are still a number of lots that include steep slopes as well as that archaeologically sensitive area. And it's obviously the purpose of the conservation development guidelines is to restrict development on these areas. So I think with some minor modifications to the plan, a greater amount of these constrained areas could be not impacted on. Now there is a unique clause in the subdivision regulations, and I'm going to read it. It says the planning board may determine that limited areas of constrained land may be disturbed in order to secure a reasonable development of the site, consistent with the findings of the conservation analysis. In that event, a portion of the site twice the area of the constrained lands to be disturbed shall be set aside from the lands identified as being conservation value and treated as constrained lands for the purpose of the density calculation and concept plan preparation. So in summary, what that says is if some of these constrained lands are unavoidable, you can impact them and the board can still act favorably upon the plan, but it would be, you would need to take that area and multiply it ×2 and add it to your constrained lands. So it's just something that I think the applicant should be aware of, because we're gonna, when this starts to go through the concept review and preliminary plan review, there's going to be a lot of focus on, making sure the amount of preserved area satisfies these requirements. So if we look at this plan, there's some steep slopes within many of the lots that I think that these would be impacted, not to a large degree. So Sean, if you could just zoom into one area, why don't you scroll over to the left a little bit? Yep, and then up a little bit. I don't have those right there. So in the lower left corner of the image, you'll see there's some areas in blue there, the constrained lands that would be impacted by those, lot grading activities. But then areas to the rear of those lots, say within the last, 50 feet of those lots, may not be impacted. So what we would recommend is that those areas, either be deed restricted or added to the open space lands so that they are protected in perpetuity, because our recommendation is if they're not permanently protected, either by deed restriction or included within the open space, that we would count those as constrained lands needing to be impacted or intended to be impacted. And therefore it would add to the amount of area to be protected as open space. One of the other things, Sean, if you can just zoom out and show the whole perimeter of the subdivision, is just in terms of where these open space areas lie. There's a few areas that are not, one of the things that we think is always desirable from an open space protection standpoint is that these areas are interconnected, so that if you ever develop walking trails through these areas, you could go from, basically parcel or open space parcel to parcel. And there's a few areas around the perimeter of the site that basically cut off these different open space areas from one another. And that's something that we would, the planning board may want to weigh in on whether or not there's value to having a interconnected open space area basically around the whole perimeter of the site. So
Sean, can you point to those areas that Joe's referring to?
So,
Right.
yeah, so there's one where it's cut off. I think there's like a 10-foot strip or something in between, maybe connecting those. And then all the way over to the left-hand side of the site. Yep, there's one. And down a little bit, off the end of the cul-de-sac. There's a stormwater management area, but then there's just one lot that cuts off the two open space areas there. And then, further down, just along that stub street right of way, there's one lot that basically cuts off two open space areas. So not saying that, they all need to be interconnected, but it's just something that the planning board may want to, consider in its review. One of the things regarding the ownership of the open space lands, it's good to get early feedback from the town and the planning board regarding, the ownership of the open space lands. Two obvious options are, one is the town would own it and therefore control it and then be responsible for, any maintenance that may be required. And the other one would be establishment of an HOA. And I think the applicant had said that wasn't their intent, but it's something that I think the planning board as well as the town administration should weigh in on, because if it's not town-owned land and it's not an HOA, another option would be dedication to a land conservation organization, which based on the configuration and relatively small size. I don't think that many organizations would be interested in taking that over. The other would be deed restricting the areas, and the areas would be in private ownership, lot ownership, but then permanently be deed restricted. And I think that's generally the least favorable option because of, the difficult to control, what gets trying to enforce those deed restrictions down the road, and the lack of having the open space provide, an overall public benefit to the area.
Joe, if I can interrupt on that point, I know Sean and I had further discussion since we had our phone call on that. Sean, would you like to add to that? Oh, darn.
Sean, are you muted?
Yeah, Sean, you're muted.
I realize that. Thank you. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit more, whether or not, this would be something the town would want to take on, or whether this is best managed, elsewhere through an HOA or a private conservation group, and we noted that Ashford Glen, which is to the east of the site here, beyond Forest Hills, is managed by the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy, for example. So whether or not, the HOA, an HOA would manage this space, or whether we would turn to somebody like the Land Conservancy to consider this. Those are things that we have to discuss and find direction on.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so a couple of other final points. One is, obviously from the air photo that we can see that the site is, basically entirely wooded with some significant sized trees. We had heard from a couple of the landowners in the area that there's some trees that are over 40 inches in diameter. Those are significant trees. And regarding section 177, it gives the planning board the ability to require, a tree survey on the site. We always, try to consider the size of the site and the number of trees that would need to be surveyed so that we're not out there, serving, so many trees that it provides no useful purpose from a planning standpoint. But, because of the, we're trying to, protect a lot of the site as open space. And if knowing that there's some significantly sized trees there, we would recommend that we start with a tree survey, maybe trees over 24 inches in diameter, and see how many of those, we find on the site. And I think that's an exercise that, CT Mail, they're well qualified to do, and it wouldn't, be that exhaustive. So we would recommend that. And I think it may provide really useful information to the planning board, because if we're getting into trees that are over 24 inches in diameter, a lot of times you can just, shift some lot lines around or roads in order to protect some, large mature trees that may be, 50, 75, 100 years old. And those are the types of features that can often, really make the subdivision unique and worthy of a conservation development subdivision. So that's something that the planning board, may want to weigh in on. And there's not a requirement in terms of having to survey trees over a certain size. There's been some commercial site plans where, we've recommended, you survey every tree over, 10 or 12 inches in diameter. But based on our visit to the site, there would be far too many trees, within that size range. And again, I really don't think that it would provide, much benefit from a planning standpoint. So that's where we came up with that 24-inch diameter number. One thing regarding the open space and whether or not there should be any form of park improvements, and access both to the park lands or open space lands from lots within the development, as well as, whether or not any of these open space lands should, serve more of a regional area, and therefore maybe public access should be afforded to at least one of the areas. That's something that the board, may want to weigh in on. Regarding access, we're supportive of these two access locations, the one on Denison and the other one on Stratford Drive. And it was also supported, during the DCC meeting with the various town departments, 2 accesses is good from an emergency access standpoint. Based on the layout and our knowledge of traffic patterns in the area, we don't think that the Stratford Drive would be used that often. Obviously, that some people on that one spur would possibly use that to get to points south, but we would think that based on this layout, most of the lots would access onto Denison Road, which is more of a suburban collector. And then just another thing, regarding the adjacent landowners, that's something that's really important that we make sure is included within the concept application materials. And then just finally, regarding the size of the lots, this is still considered like a cluster subdivision. Some of these lots we assume are much less than a minimum lot size, which is good. Some of the lots definitely are larger, and some of these larger lots continue to have these constrained lands. And that's something that I think the planning board may want to weigh in on. Is that something that's, desirable to the planning board, having these larger lots with the constrained lands? Would you want it deed restricted or included in the open space? I think the earlier the applicant gets feedback on that, I think that the more of an efficient planning process will take place. So, Pete, that's all we've got so far.
Okay, I'm just going to chime in on one thing and then turn it over to the other board members. I think the deed restricted portions, like the longer lots, I would rather include that in the open space, not have it deed restricted. I think deed restricted is the most difficult to enforce over time. If somebody mows the back of their lawn, nobody's really going to be aware of that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. I'll go down the board the way we used to sit. Chief Hyder, do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry for the picture not working again. It was working for a while. Well, it's going to cut back out again. Can you hear me?
I can see and hear you, Chief.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Whatever reason the picture backed out again. I only have 3 comments. One, which I'm sure is very minor. Newport Drive does not line up with Newport Drive on the top.
Hey, Chief.
Yeah.
Chief, this is Joe. If I could just interrupt you for a minute. I assume everybody's getting feedback. If everybody else could mute their phones except Steve, that would be better, I think.
Any better? Okay.
Yes, it's better.
So anyway, Newport Drive, where it comes in by the water tank, right now it doesn't show the 2 streets lining up. Newport don't line up. So I mean, that's a minor design issue, but just for the sake of saying it, those 2, they don't line up. As far as the main entrance off of Denison Road, I appreciate they took all lots off for the park, but I still think that first lot on the right should disappear. If you look across the street at Charlotte's other development, they made it so that there wasn't a house right on the corner of the street. So unless they can do a very similar thing that they did a lot across the street in the architecturally sensitive area and make it all woodland across Denison Road, I think that lot should disappear too. Finally, the most important thing, it's nice that they made a park of 5 acres, but a lot of it's constrained area, and being familiar with the area, I don't see how you're going to make a park out of it. You're not going to be able to walk in it. The slopes are very steep. I don't see where there's any way that other people other than this development can access it. And really, there's no way even a way for the people from this development to access that park without coming out on a Denison Road and going into the park, which to me would mandate sidewalks along Denison Road. So that's my 3 main comments. I'm glad they did away with the lots on Denison. They've obviously made an effort to try to clean it up, but especially the park. It's nice to say it's designated as a park, but if you can't make it into a park, if it don't look like a park, it's not a park. So that's basically my comments.
Okay, thank you. Good comments. Craig?
I agree with Chief. I mean, that is really not much of a town park, and I understand that there's a debate about who is going to end up owning that. I agree with Joe's assessment. That has always been my reading of how the math works on constrained and unconstrained lands. So if that's the case, then there's still a lot of modification that needs to take place to this plan. And I just want to clarify, Joe, so the lots that are adjacent to what's designated as the town park that have steep slopes on them, if those steep slopes stay in those lots, then they need to come up with some additional constrained land. Is that correct?
Exactly, unless they deed restricted it so that we were assured that they would never be disturbed. But that would be subject to something, and we've already heard from, the chairman that that's not desirable. But that is, if
Okay.
there's any chance that they could be impacted, I think we got to count them as being disturbed at some point.
Okay. I mean, and to that point, I mean, the purple is slopes greater than 25%. So some of these slopes could be considerably greater than, and 25% is a pretty substantial slope. And I understand that this is just a sketch plan, but they've got slopes literally right up against the houses on those couple of lots. And then when you go up on the road toward the water tower, Sean, if you can pan over that way, there's some steep slopes that they're showing essentially in the front of the lot. It almost looks like there's a, for lack of a better word, a berm almost across the front of those lots. I mean, I obviously haven't climbed up there, but I mean, that seems a little odd.
Hey, Craig.
Yep.
This is Joe. So there's basically a slope that continues up to the west. It's a continuous slope, but I think what happened is there's only a thin strip that actually exceeds the 25%. But all of those lots there along that western side of that spur, the slopes are probably all, over 10%, so most of the slopes are 10 to 25%. There's just a thin strip there that exceeds over 25%.
Okay. All right. I wanted to understand what was happening there.
Can I just, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just say on that one area, there was a temporary road that was put in during the construction of the water tower. And I believe some of that was to put the road in. They created a 1-on-3 slope in that area to just to berm up so they could drive through it. And I think some of that was created from that. Just
okay.
Just so you know.
All right. The first lot where the archaeological sensitive area, I mean, the usable area on that lot is awfully small, as you're showing on the sketch plan. So I'm not sure whether that should really be a lot or whether the lot lines really should be shifted dramatically. I don't know what the plan would be to keep people out of that area, but I mean, essentially the homeowner has no side yard whatsoever. And I agree with Joe that we probably should consider a tree survey. I don't know when that should happen, because clearly by my interpretation and Joe's interpretation, there's a fair amount of configuration that still needs to change here before you're even close to getting the math to work. So that's all I've got right now.
Okay, Susan? Susan, you'll probably have to unmute yourself.
I agree about the open space versus the deed restriction. There are just too many problems potentially with deed restrictions. I don't have much to add. I agree with the comments that have been made.
Okay, thank you. Lou?
I think it's pretty much been said. I agree with what the chief says, the concern with the park. That is pretty steep going into there, into that area that's designated as a park. I also like the idea that the I'm trying to get the idea of the on the right, that first on the right as we're looking at it, that first lot there where it comes right out on Denison Road. I kind of like the idea that cover that, make that a whole tree line, or make that lot tree, or make it smaller and put some trees in there. Do something to make it consistent all the way down, because the entire development is behind the trees. I definitely agree with what you said, Pete, concerning the instead of the deed restriction, have it as constrained lands.
Thank you. Chip? Chip, Chip, you need to unmute yourself. I think it's the lower left.
Number 80, that looks like there's a lot of water there. Is that what that is? So it's to the left as you're coming in from Denison.
Can you repeat the whole question? Because I'm not sure.
I said, coming in from Denison, I think 80 is the first lot on the left, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, that Chip, this is Joe. That area that's shown of the trees to remain, that area is an archaeologically sensitive area that would be fenced off.
Okay. I don't think you should leave caring for the control of these constrained areas to a HOA. They have a tough enough time trying to have everybody meet other regulations. And I think that would be too much.
Okay, anything else?
No, I agree pretty much with everything else has been said.
Paul?
I agree with the open space going to the town. We can add it to our inventory. It's kind of like what we've been trying to do for the last 10 years. As far as the passive park coming in where the 3 lots were on Denison Road, you know, walking trails could be established in there. I know there's a steep slope, but there's areas there you could walk. You know, and then the people over on Forest Hills and those areas will be able to access this. This whole area is walked by people all the time. There's people up and down through this there. It's a beautiful area. But I think that, you know, having the passive park there, maybe some, you know, develop some walking trails in there to a certain degree. That's all we really need to look at there.
Okay, I'm gonna try to sum up and give my opinion as well. I generally agreed with everything that was said. I think connecting up the green spaces in those areas that were pointed out would not be that difficult to accomplish. I think we could shorten some of the longer lots, and it would also help with the math of the applicant getting to the constrained lands. I'll repeat that I don't think the deed restrictions in the back of the lots really work, are ideal, nor do they really work as well. I would prefer to add them to the open space. And I think you can do it without reducing the number of lots. However, I do agree with Chief about that first lot. And I don't know if there's a way to reconfigure, but I think there should be some green space there on Denison Road. And I think I'll ask Joe about this again, because I want to have clarity. Where the archaeological spot is,
Yep.
What do you think the options are? The way they've proposed it, first talk about how they've proposed it. Is that part of an individual person's lot?
That's the way they've proposed it, yes.
And it's going to have a fence around it?
Well, Melissa can clarify. Typically, this is an area where they identified an archaeologically sensitive resource within that area. And then the State Historic Preservation Office will recommend a certain perimeter area that serves as a buffer to the resource, probably an old foundation or something. So, and typically they look for some kind of physical demarcation by fencing and signage so that it doesn't get, you know, disturbed in the future. But I think what I'm hearing is that the desire of the board is to, because you're adjacent to a other open space lands, just expand the open space area, include that area within it, so that nobody has the right to, impact that in the future.
I think that's my opinion. I agree with that latter statement. Again, to repeat the interconnectedness, I guess I would say this. Chief doesn't think you could use the 5 acres, or Craig, be difficult to use as, a passive park. And Paul thinks maybe you can, there could be hiking trails there. So in conjunction, I would try to look at it holistically, do as much connectedness as you can, and drill down a little further and see, what these areas could be used for. So that's my comment. I think the tree survey idea is a good idea. I think starting with 24 inches is a good idea. Joe, am I correct in assuming that they would only need to survey the areas that the lots are going to be on?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yep. And the only thing I would like to say, like Chip said, or like Craig had said, the lot is, or the layout may be subject to some more revisions. So, but I think generally the area that they're proposing for development is where they should, do the survey. But it's important, those 2 trees over 40 inches in diameter. I think they are within the area of the proposed development and the road. But if not, it would be good to have those shown on the plans, because those are really, it's rare to have a tree that's that large. That you're probably talking a tree well over 100 years old. And no matter where those 2 trees are located, it would be good to have those shown on the plan.
And Joe,
Okay, my final comment just has to do with ownership. In some ways, I'm personally indifferent. Paul says the town would like to acquire the land. Sean, can you check to see what they're saying? What the supervisor's office says? And
Peter?
we also talked about a land conservancy. So if you can drill down on that as well. That's my final comment.
Peter,
Yes.
one more comment. I know from being adjacent to wetlands with signage, signs don't always work. I think maybe a fence would, some sort of barrier would be called for right here.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? Joe or the applicant, do you want to respond to any of this? We'll give the applicant an opportunity if they want to say anything.
This is Dominic. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I think the comments are well taken. I believe our biggest process is to recalculate the constrained areas based on what we will be disturbing for steep slopes areas, things like that. So again, the calculation of what's more than 25% is, it's kind of an assumption, and there's some areas are very small, but we'll have to redo that calculation. I don't know how it's going to add, but to the conservation area and all the calculation, I agree. We'll have to go through that. My biggest question, I guess, is with the tree survey. The question was asked and answered a little bit as far as the areas we have to consider. Now, do we have to, the roadway itself, I'm assuming is, we can't not consider that, or are we looking at the lot grading that we're proposing, or as it should be from center line of road back, 100 feet each way? Is there a limitation that we could stick to without getting into areas we're not actually going to develop, or should be the entire lot that we're calling a property line? Just looking for a little guidance.
I'll ask Joe to respond to that because he'll have a better answer than I will. Joe Grasso.
I would recommend the areas within the proposed lots as well as all of the proposed right-of-way.
Okay, and anything over 24 inches, we'd want to identify the diameter.
I think that's what we're saying, unless some of the other board members have a different opinion.
24-inch diameter breast height.
All right, and is the tree type important as well?
It is.
Okay, all right. Because,
You know, you don't have to get into whether it's a, you know, a white oak or red oak, but an oak, maple, you know,
right,
beech,
that's-
you
all right,
know,
all right.
cottonwood, because cottonwoods obviously aren't that valuable. So,
Yeah, that's why I was asking, are we looking at basically hardwood trees? I mean, we could find pine trees that are
But-
that big in diameter in some instances, so.
So if the board is okay, I mean, this, you know, once you get out there and start the survey, if you think that there's something that's a question as to whether or not it needs to be identified or how it needs to be identified, I would like to be able to, you know, weigh in on that exercise.
Right. It's more of a matter of me who I send out to do this. If it's just someone who, you know, can measure a tree, but someone who needs to identify what the tree is, I need to send a different person out to do the survey. That's basically why I'm asking the question. It's not getting the
Yeah,
information.
I think the type of tree is important to know.
Okay, all right. Like I said, all the other stuff I think are well taken, and we will address them. The open space issue, I think we need to further address that once we determine the exact amount that is constrained and unconstrained, considering redoing the calculations. Once we do that, I guess we get more discussion on how the constrained lands will be handled by deed restrictions or however we're going to do it. I know an HOA is not something that the applicant is even wants to consider for the development section of that, but there's other areas of like you said, donating the land or having somebody else take over the responsibility to it if there's trails and stuff on there. That's really about all I have. And I guess we'll work through it. I don't know if Melissa wants to add anything from my comments. Let her speak.
No, Dominic, thank you for that. I did want to just mention the two larger trees, Joe, we have surveyed, located those. They're not on the sketch plan, but I can send that to you so you can see they're not in the right of way.
Great, thanks, Melissa.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I agree with what Dominic said. We'll take all these comments into consideration and we'll look at this conservation analysis closer with you.
Great. So Pete, just before we wrap up, I think it's important just to talk about the process. They've you know, been in front of the board twice for sketch plan review. And I think, you know, CT Mill's a very qualified firm. They know what it takes to put a concept plan together. And you know, I think the directives from the planning board were very clear tonight. So my recommendation would be that they, you know, if they so choose, they'd be allowed to advance to a concept subdivision application.
Okay, I have no objections. Do any of the board members have any comment on that?
No, I have one more comment. If you're gonna make that, I guess it's 8 acres now, if you're gonna make that a park with a sign saying it's a park, what are you gonna do about parking?
Our initial intent was that if it became a park, there could be some very light parking areas off of Denison Road that can be developed. I don't think you'd want it to be a large parking area for probably no more than 10 a dozen cars, maybe. That's not going to take up a lot of area.
Okay,
And I just want to jump in on Joe's comment. I'm fine with them advancing to concept, but I think they and we all need to understand that they're taking a risk by doing that, because quite honestly, you could make an argument that this should not have even been before us tonight, because the math is not consistent with our understanding of the math. And that's really where it should have been before it even came back to us. So I'm fine with moving to concept, but everybody, I think, needs to understand that this still has a long way to go. So.
Well, if I can just, we agree. I agree with you that the concept plans, but the thing that allows you to give us the approval for sketch to go to concept, it gives us the flexibility to do other work on the project, to solidify other things. So we just appreciate having that little bit of freedom to go do that. But trust me, we're not going to go that much further with the layout until we come back and present to the board again.
Peter, if I can make one comment?
Sure, certainly.
I would think a concept that there's gonna have to be a concept presentation about what this park entails, access, parking and everything else on the plan at the point of concept.
Okay, and so Sean and Joe and the applicant, you've got your work to do on that
Mhm.
and figuring something out.
Yep, understood. I think I got it.
Okay, anybody else, anything else from the board? Okay, I'd like to thank everybody and the applicant, and we'll see you when you come back. And we will call up the third and final item on the agenda. And that will be the Acadia New Loudon LLC 73 Loudon Road, Acadia Bank Pad. The proposal is for the construction of a new one-story, 3,375 square foot bank with drive-through on portion of existing parking lot with Price Chopper Plaza. We've seen this a couple of times, and hopefully we're where we need to be. Who on staff, does someone on staff, either Zach or Sean, want to make comment on this? Or Mike, I'm not sure who.
Yeah, Mike, if you're unmuted, I'd like to have you just highlight what this project here.
Yeah,
You've been
sure.
reviewing it.
Sure. Yeah, the board's seen this a couple of times. They're here for final tonight, obviously. At the last meeting, there were 3 major points that the board had asked director to follow up on. That was the elevation, that it tied into more to Market 32 Bistro. The fact that they had that access easement agreement between the neighboring parcel at 881 Loudon Road, and wanted staff to check on 2 possible waivers that they were questioning about before. My write-up, I justified how they're not required, and I went over it with the TDE as well, which is why they're here tonight for just final approval and final seeker, no waiver requests.
Okay, thank you. We'll turn it over to the applicant. Who's speaking for the applicant?
It's me, Victor Campanera.
Hello, Victor.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. So as Mike has indicated, the last time we were in front of the board and got concept approval was on May 14th, 2019. And since that time, we've been working to get this ingress easement solidified, and we have finally done that. And Mike has worked with us on this also. And once this was taken care of, we then wanted to get this thing advanced on to final. But we think we've accomplished and taken care of all of the questions that the board had vis-a-vis the items that Mike brought up. We don't need any waivers. This project, everyone's aware of where it's located. It's a building that's going to be a bank branch for Chase. There's already a bank branch for, I think it's Key Bank on the south side of the property. And basically, that's pretty much it. We're looking for the board's favorable vote on this for final tonight. And Phil Kozel from LaBerge Engineering is with us. If there's any questions relative to the engineering of the project. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. This has been reviewed and is being reviewed by our town designated engineer, Barton LaJudas. We have Chuck Voss here. You're here, right, Chuck?
I'm
Can
here.
we make sure Chuck's not? Okay. Would you like to give us your comments, please?
Sure. The board should have in their packets a review letter from last fall. It was our final review letter, and we've gone through the last submission that Victor had mentioned, that Michael had mentioned. Basically, it was our November review. And we really felt at that point that they had addressed all the technical comments that had arisen throughout the project during the process. We looked at things like stormwater, the site layout. There was landscaping discussions that had occurred between the board and the applicant that were included on the plan. As Mike mentioned, there was the waiver analysis that we certainly concur with. We see no changes to that.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Can we put the layout up and then we'll go back to the, yeah, thank you. Sorry, Chuck.
Sure. And then there was the access easement that was discussed. I know that was kind of a sticking point for the board and certainly for the applicant, which I think delayed things for a little while, as Victor could note. But that's been worked out now to the satisfaction of the town. Certainly, we have no objection to that at all. We think that makes proper access management sense if and when the other adjacent parcels come up for development. So at least there's a connection there. In terms of circulation and parking, the site, currently, as the board knows, is a vacant parking lot, if you will. It's a corner of the vacant parking lot in the plaza. And as the site is going to be situated, and as the bank building is going to be situated, it's really tucked up into that westerly corner of the parking area. So from a circulation standpoint, really the only traffic generator here will be the bank itself. There are no other adjacent businesses where you'll have vehicles circulating in and around this site. So really, it becomes a destination point specifically just for users of the bank. So in terms of internal circulation, we certainly worked with Phil to make that more efficient, and we feel that certainly works well now. Phil can certainly address maybe some of the technical components, but I know the board had some questions about parking along that southern side, which Phil has added. We've got the access aisles now along the westerly side adjacent to Route 9. And, there's some pedestrian crosswalk demarcations there that we understand are really for kind of pedestrian safety, if nothing else. But from the rest of the standpoint, we're comfortable with the project as proposed. I know the board had also discussed the landscaping of the entire, or the bulk of the front of the plaza, I should say. I can certainly let Victor touch on that, but I think that's been resolved as well now to the satisfaction of everybody. So in terms of the final approval, we're comfortable at this point. It appears that everything has been addressed, and the plans that were recently submitted are accurate and complete.
Okay, Sean, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we turn it over to the board?
No, I think that Chuck addressed those. We had a good call today just to wrap these pieces up. There were a couple of things that were, a little bit odd to me on the site plan. Chuck mentioned there's the crosswalk there. I'm not really sure the intent that, on that. Location of the bike rack is somewhat removed from the front of the entrance. And then just maybe talk a little bit about the circulation pattern that exists here. In particular, I'm a little bit of a concern that, coming out of the ATM lane, we're directing people back down to the parking lot, but I think there's some opportunities for drivers to disregard that and drive forward, or attempt to drive forward.
So you're okay with the
Those are my-
circulation? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I said, it's a little, it wasn't what I guess when I first looked at it would have expected, but if the board's okay with it, I think that we're satisfied that it's safe circulation.
Okay, well, we'll have further discussion on that. And the walkway to nowhere or whatever, does the applicant want to address that, or at least explain that?
Yeah, Phil Kojal, LaBerge. So initially, when we had one of our meetings, there was concern about the parking on the south side, which is near the main entrance there, people parking there and crossing over to get to the bank, and possibly kind of having some conflicts with the people driving up for the ATM use. So we've added the sidewalk there. It provides a clear path for people to use. It also alerts the drivers that there's potential conflict there. And so that's kind of how we addressed your issue there that you brought up at one of the meetings. I think that addresses that. So you did mention the bike rack on the side of the building. It's not in the front of the building because we were trying to deal with the grade issue for the site. So that's why it's in the corner over there. And then the drive-through aisle and the exit at the top of the drive-through there, we've arranged that so that it's pretty difficult not to, come back out and not back out to the end of the access point, I guess, so that you're not having these people cut through parking lot area and stuff like that. But you will have people who, if they decide they don't want to wait in the ATM line, there's a drive-through exit, and they would be directed over to the north of the site. But again, it's pretty much an unused parking area.
Okay, and can we go to the elevation? And Chuck, can you tell, or somebody tell us what's been revised on the elevation?
Why don't I let Victor and Phil discuss that quickly?
We have some folks from the architects here, TPG. Maybe they can talk to that.
Sure.
I'm Mitchell with TPG Architecture, and we worked on the design of this. We used some elements that actually relate directly to the shopping development behind, with Market Bistro and the Raymore and Flanagan store. Those being the flat tower element along the east elevation and the peak tower element on the west elevation. And then also the bricks with the ornamental banding, similar to Market Bistro. And then the ephes, the tan painted ephes at the top, which matches the color similar to Market Bistro, and the manufactured stone base along those elevations as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there a landscaping plan? Because I think it's been a while since the board's seen this.
There is.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
So the last Phil Kojal again, the last concern with that, the landscaping plan was we had it phased over 5 years. And the board was concerned about that time period, and we reduced it down to a 2-year phase implementation, where the front would be the first phase. So the frontage of the whole plaza would be first phase.
Okay, is there a picture of that here or no?
Yeah, Phil, is that the 2018? Well, let me show you what I've got here.
I think it's sheet 15 in the packet,
Thanks.
15 or 16.
Could you also explain why you need so long instead of doing it all at one time? Why you need to phase it in over 2 years?
That I believe I don't know if Manan's on. Manan, are you on?
Phil, this is an older plan. I think we reduce it down to the 2 phases. I think the first, this is Manan Joshi, I represent the applicant. The 2 phases represent the first phase being the removal of some of the trees, and the second phase is the planting of new trees. And like Phil mentioned, originally it was phased out in 5 years, that we reduce it down to 2 phases to address the the planning board's comments.
But why can't you remove them and then plant them at the same time?
Well, if I can say something on the first phase does include plantings. So if we're looking at the plan right now, and that whole first phase is removing some of the dead and dying trees and replacing those with new landscaping. So that's all in the first phase. So the frontage and the entry and the bank all gets it's taken care of in the first phase.
Correct.
John, can you scroll to the sheet that shows the number of plantings and
Yeah, now this sheet's going to show you the detailed planning just for the entryway and the bank, but here you go. You're right. You got it.
Craig?
I'm not enamored with 2 years, but it's certainly better than 5. But I just want to point out that what they're talking about here is a total of, and I know that some of this is replacing dead trees, some of it is new trees, but they're talking about 22 trees and then a lot of shrubs and several hundred perennials. So I think it's important that everybody recognize what they're putting in the ground, and that's fine. I'm not complaining about what they're proposing, because I think if it's done well, it's going to look very nice, and if it's maintained properly each year, it's going to look great. Normally I think we would be making somebody do this in a year because we would. I'm okay with 2 years, although I might throw out as a idea that they post a bond to get for the second year's worth of work.
I agree with that.
That's a good idea if they're going to take 2 years, in my opinion.
You can take an escrow in. You've done that before.
Or escrow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, either one.
Escrow's better.
The other
We'd
question,
prefer
the other question I have on the trees in particular is normally, Sean, if you can blow that up a little bit again, normally on trees, the schedules call for caliper size, and I noticed on this that I'm assuming that they're talking about height. Chuck, are we okay with, is an 8 to 10 foot tree a 2.5 to 3 inch caliper, which is I think what we would normally look for on a commercial project?
Yeah, in general,
it seems like a pretty small tree for a commercial project.
Generally speaking, you would want to see a caliper, indicated on the landscaping plan, especially for the trees. They've got some maples in there, some pears, some service berries. The 8 to 10 foot height, balled up, it still could be a relatively young tree. You might get a 2 inch caliper out of something like that, maybe a little bit less. I think it's something that if the board is certainly concerned with, that it's sustainable and that it will certainly take root within the first season, you might want to request, a 2.5 to 3 inch caliper specimen tree, especially for those trees in phase 1. They're going to be along Route 9 and along the entrance road. So something to consider.
Well, let's mark the plans now. Let's be ready for that with the vote.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, we'll go down the line with the board again. Paul, we'll start. Yeah.
Did you hear me, Peter?
Paul?
Yeah, I'm right here, Peter.
Okay, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I just, from a practical standpoint, planting trees along Route 9 from a businessman standpoint, is that gonna let that bank function from Route 9? Is anybody gonna be able to actually see the bank once those trees start to develop? It's like the street trees that we see on Wolf Road. You go up Wolf Road now and you can't find the buildings. You have to literally look under the trees. So I guess that's a concern from a practical standpoint.
Okay, anything else? I don't know. Respectfully, I don't really agree with that. So I think Wolf Road's fine, but I know that's a bugaboo of yours. So we'll see if anybody else says anything. Chip?
Yeah, I appreciate the changes they made in the color scheme of the bank, so it ties in more with the rest of the shopping center. I guess in terms of the landscaping, I just like to see the first thing in the agenda, the first phase, that all the removed trees be replaced first. I think that should happen first.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, Lou?
Well, I already brought up my concern about the trees, but I tend to agree with Paul. When you look at Wolf Road, initially the trees that are planted were nice, But now as they grow, you are searching for the businesses. So, it's just something to be thinking about.
Okay. Susan?
And as for the trees, I mean, if this is what their proposal is, I don't have then I'm fine with what the types of trees that they planned. Not only that, half the year there aren't leaves on the trees anyway. And in terms of I don't know if it makes more sense to do some of the trees or put in some of the perennial and shrubs so that they can develop because they tend to be more attractive. Parts of the landscaping, maybe the answer is a combination of doing some trees and some of the perennials and some of the shrubs in the first phase.
Okay. We seem to have various opinions on the planting, so I'm not sure how we're going to resolve that, but maybe we'll.
It looks like the phase one does have a combination of both.
Craig, I know you've already had some comments, but do you have more?
Yeah, I don't really have anything else. I mean, I think Mike was chiming in, and I think he's correct. They are doing both. They're doing the trees in the first phase. They're also doing some of the other shrubs and perennials in the first phase as well. So I mean, I'm good with the landscape plan. I tend to agree with you, Peter, that I mean, yes, sometimes the trees do block visibility on Wolf Road and other roads, but at some point the trees get big enough that they stop blocking visibility too. And I think they've made some nice improvements to the building. It's the aesthetics of the building. So I mean, overall, I think they've done a nice job here.
Now, does your comment address what Susan was just talking about Phasing in some of the perennials?
I think so. I mean, Susan can certainly.
I guess Susan looks like the only one to answer that, right?
It looks like phase one includes perennials and larger trees as well. So it's a nice mix in the front.
To me, that makes most sense to have a mix going in.
Yeah, especially for the frontage.
Okay, so
I agree.
That simplifies it a little bit. Chief Hyder?
Yeah, just a couple of things. And Sean, if you could go back to the plan, it's all over the place here. Basically, that's why they're called street trees. You want the street trees. The town has asked for them for 40 years, and eventually they do need to be trimmed out to protect the appearance of the project. But I think that's why we have the street trees, and I think they're a good idea. I don't think you should hold this applicant totally responsible for this whole mall, and that's why I'm in favor of the 2-year plan, to give them a little time to take care of it. My only question, maybe I missed an in-between meeting here. That seems like an awful lot of parking around the bank. When today an awful lot of parking is done remotely, especially along that entrance, along the main entrance in. I know it's a little late to be talking about this, but that just seems like an awful lot of parking around the bank. But as far as the project goes, I think it's a great project for that corner. It's going to dress up that corner. I wish they could do the same thing on the other corner. That's it.
Does it make sense to talk about banked parking or?
Well, it's almost 40 parking spots for a bank. When have I ever seen any bank around here have 40 people in front of it?
Well, can we get back to that drawing?
And we talked about bank parking I think the last time this project was before us, and whether or not they could do some bank parking. And I think that was something that they were going to come back with.
Does the applicant want to respond?
Phil, why don't you respond to that? I just read the minute meetings from May 14th, and there was some discussion about the parking, and you had some comment on that. So what do you have to say about the parking?
Well, we were certainly trying to meet a minimum parking requirement, but I don't know if Chase Bank is on the meeting or not, but they had expressed to me after one of the meetings that they need all the parking they can get. And so I don't know if they're planning, if it's a different type of business model they've got where they want more people to come into the bank. And
okay, let me suggest this. If there's an opportunity and your client agrees, where would you recommend banking parking?
Well, I think we talked about it at one of the meetings. It would be along the south where provided the crosswalk.
Yep.
So that
Okay. Okay, will you revisit that with your client, and we'll give you permission? It may be a cost matter issue with you too. So you can bank, how many, let's get specific. Which, the whole bank of parking there? I mean, that whole,
there's I would say that whole bank could be.
okay, whatever portion of that if your client agrees, will allow you to bank it, which will save you cost up front too.
Yeah.
There's a board, are you saying they absolutely won't, or you already know the answer?
Oh, I would, I know they have a strong opinion that they want the most parking that they can get, but I don't know if they fully recognize the fact that they could add the parking later or not, so.
Okay, why don't you visit that with them? Because they can add it later if they have a need.
Yeah, and if I just wanted to say one thing about the caliper size on the trees, if I could.
Excuse me,
calipers-
guys. This is Rich Daughters from Chase Bank.
There you go.
On the line, we'll definitely look into that, banking and the parking, of course. We'll go over with the developer, see how much we can give up. Sure.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
Appreciate it.
Sorry to cut you off.
Not at all.
I missed what he said, Peter.
He said he's with Chase Bank and he's going to look into banking the parking.
Okay, thanks.
And that would be, Peter, on the south side as we're looking at it, facing
Correct,
the.
which would be the left-hand side,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. Right.
Yep, that's it.
Perfect.
Okay, tree calipers.
Yes, if I could, I think the 2.5-inch size requirement would be appropriate for the frontage trees, but not in the interior of the plaza where there's limited room there for plantings. So I'm not sure if you would want, or we could actually meet that requirement for 2.5-inch caliper in a little parking island inside the plaza. But I could certainly talk to the landscape architect about that and see what we could do as far as specifying the caliper size.
Craig, did you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm perfectly happy with leaving that up to the applicant and staff to work out and make sure that the appropriate size trees are in any of the islands. I think all the maples are either on the entranceway or Route 9, but as I say, I'm perfectly happy letting staff work that out.
Okay. Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, in terms of the parking at the south side, there's 12 spaces. I mean, the thing you could do is if there's a matter of how many, or 12 is too many to bank, then you could probably do it this way, 6 and have them parallel park and just put 6 slots in there in parallel.
Okay, we'll have them take a look at that with Sean and Chuck.
And I would be fine if they, if they felt as though they could bank more than 12, give them that kind of leeway as well.
It's okay with me.
Sure.
Makes sense, yep.
Anything else? Okay, we'll try to keep those provisos in mind as we walk through the environmental review. Chuck, can you walk us through that?
Sure, let me get over there. Hold on one second. All right, the board should have, again, in your packets, the short environmental assessment form. Part 1 was completed by the applicant and the questions were answered there. We also prepared a seeker recommendation. We get the date of this. This was November 5th, 2019. The plan has not changed significantly such that it would affect this seeker determination. The board has listed this as an unlisted action as per seeker. And then we completed a part 2 form. Peter, I can go through the 11 questions. They're all
given the type of meeting we're having, I would say abbreviate it more than we usually do.
Yeah, the part 2 form answers basically.
And I will just say for the record, we've had these forms and we've been studying them, and we will have opportunities to ask questions. So if you could go through them in a more expedited fashion than we usually do.
Will do. And what this part 2 does is it assesses the impact, whether it's a small to moderate to large impact. Questions 1 through 10 basically were all answered no or small impact may occur. So we felt that there was really no environmental impact associated with the project based on those questions. Part 3 was then prepared. Part 3 again went through and listed the determination of significance that the lead agency was responsible for. We looked at those and we determined that based on the information and the analysis within the seeker forms and all the supporting documentation and plans, that the proposed action will not result in a significant environmental impact. And therefore, a negative declaration was prepared for the board that basically states the lead agency has reviewed the application, site plans, project description, and all supporting documentation, and conducted such further investigation of the project and its environmental effects as the lead agency has deemed appropriate. Based on this review, the lead agency has determined the action will have no significant effects on the environment.
Okay, do we have a motion on that negative declaration, and then we'll have an opportunity to discuss it?
Make a motion.
Second.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
I'll just
who
make
made the
one
motion?
statement that this is a redevelopment of a site. So I think the impact is minimal. I think it's visually anyway, it's going to be an improvement to the site. So that's my only statement. Anybody else? Okay, we have a motion before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. The motion is adopted unanimously. Now with
Pete, just
respect,
for the record, who made that motion?
I think Lou made
I
it.
didn't
didn't
hear.
Yeah, I made it. I made it.
Lou and Chip.
Lou.
he? And Chip seconded it.
Right.
Thank
Lou
you.
made it, Chip seconded it. That's what I heard.
Thank you.
With respect to the main motion, which is for final approval, with the provisos that we discussed, that the applicant will work with the department and consider banking some of the parking, which means they will not, if in the future they find they need more parking, they will have the opportunity without coming back to the planning board to increase their parking size. And with the other proviso that the calipers of the trees, specifically the street trees, will be increased as per what Craig said, and they work with staff on the rest of the trees. And if some board members disagree, they can try to amend it or voice their opposition, or we can take it up separately. We want to make sure everyone has a voice. We don't want to try to ram it through if a majority of the board doesn't want it. So with those provisos and all the normal provisos of
Peter?
Yes,
Peter, also with an escrow or bond for the second phase.
okay, escrow or bond for the second phase of the plantings. Okay, good. That's a good one.
Can we recommend the escrow for that?
Okay, Craig, Sean's recommending escrow rather than bond, and I agree with you.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
with those provisos and the normal conditions that this is subject to all the town comments, planning board comments, and comments of the town designated engineer, do we have a motion?
Make a motion.
I'll second.
Lou.
Okay, does anybody want to speak on that motion before we vote? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Okay, I didn't hear any no's, so the motion was adopted unanimously.
I've got Lou for the motion. Who for the second?
I did.
Chief,
Chip.
Doesn't matter.
is there any other further business before this board? Okay, stay healthy, everybody. It's actually fun seeing you.
Seen somebody.
Hey, Peter,
Let's
Thank you, everyone.
Peter, I'm the only one wearing a tie and a suit here tonight. What's going on?
You look good, Victor.
Thank you.
Pants. You
The
got
way it
pants
should
on?
be.
Victor, you got
Thank you
pants
very
on?
much.
Victor, you wearing pants?
Yes, I'm
Hey,
wearing
hey, hey.
pants. All
He's
right,
wearing a
guys,
pajama bottom.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Be
Bye-bye.
safe.
Take care.